everybody. I'm Mike Goldberg, and welcome to UFC 20.
It's a spotlight night, and the light is shining bright.
Tonight, the present and the past collide to dictate the future. And he's versatile. It's over. It's over. Tito Ortiz has finished it. Tito Ortiz is the champion. How about that? It is all over.
He's out.
Just like that. Wow. She's unbelievable.
You can't play games in the octagon, even if you're Anderson Silva.
10 seconds. Could he finish him here? It's all over. Conor McGregor is the UFC interim featherweight champion. Wow. Grinding with the knee now. Petchko has big trouble. It's all over. Just like that.
Oh my goodness.
Again.
Mike Goldberg has been commentating UFC events since 1997, and in that time he's seen some of the sport's biggest fighters, fights and events. Now, while Goldberg was in Melbourne for UFC 193, Elvis Sinosic had a chance to speak with the voice of the UFC.
Welcome to UFC Fight Week, Mike. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on here.
The king of rock and rumble, my good friend from many years, not that we're not friends now, but from so many years ago.
Yeah, we met such a long time ago, UFC 30, when I first fought against Tito. You called my fight. Then I was there a couple of more things, and then UFC 33, where we commentated together.
I remember that.
Now, that was my last time commentating. What did I do wrong, Mike?
I thought you were awesome. Maybe the English population in North America couldn't understand you. I can understand you. I think your accent is really cool. But it certainly wasn't your content. You were great.
Well, that experience...
And look at where you are now, so it explains,
That experience working with you guys was awesome. It's where it brought me to where I am today. Watch you guys, how professional we were. So, you know, I structured myself around you guys. Thank you for that experience.
Well, you were smart, because I still, and you're a very good friend of mine, we've been friends for a long time. I still remember when your hair was dyed red, and it got a lot redder by the end of the fight. And I thought, when you said to me, Goldie, I might want to do TV, I'm like, yes. Please do TV. Now, you're not a great fighter, but I'm like, good call. Do the TV thing. Nobody hits you.
It took a couple more fights for me to get that through my head.
I don't know if nobody hits you. Maybe Tara tries to hit you once in a while, but nobody's really trying to hurt you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, you were there from the early days. 1997, you started with the SEG era. I mean, that's just crazy. What was your thoughts when you first saw the UFC and the first time you went to commentate for it? What were you thinking?
First of all, I was like, wow, people were watching this. I was really fascinated by it, Elvis, because it was a situation of two men will enter the octagon, only one will leave. And it wasn't Elvis against Goldie, it was jiu-jitsu against judo or wrestling against karate. And it was great, and a lot of people watched it. In fact, we just had the 22nd anniversary of the first ever UFC, which is totally fascinating. I went in there just kind of going, okay, wow, this is what's going to happen here. The late Jeff Blatnick, the Olympic gold medalist, was my partner. He taught me a wealth of MMA in a very short time. John McCarthy, his wife Elaine McCarthy were great. And I just, at that point, Elvis, I looked at it as the fun of it, the energy. I could have energy, I could tell a few stories. And then over the years, I got to learn it a lot more.
Back then, it was like the sport was fringe. It was an underground sport. You know, I started in 1997. I had to take, you know, a year, two off in between just because it was so hard to get fights. There was no money. You were traveling to these tiny arenas everywhere, just trying to find somewhere where it wasn't illegal. How was that?
Joe and I often talk about some of the crazy places we were, if it was Biloxi or Lake St. Charles, Louisiana. And I remember, like yesterday, Elvis, we had a show in New Orleans. That was the big deal. Vitor was in the main event. But the arena was like 10 minutes from the airport, and our hotel was right across the street from the airport. And we had this glorious open with all kinds of Bourbon Street. And I'm like, I'm not even close to Bourbon Street. I didn't say anything about it. I pretended we were in New Orleans, but we really weren't. Getting tickets back then was not a problem. Giving tickets to hundreds of your friends back then was not a problem. There was truly a cult following. There were truly people who loved it. But yeah, we went to some pretty small places most of the time, as you know, because we had to go into states that would be good as far as the regulatory affairs was going.
Yeah, no, look, it was a very difficult era for the sport. You know, it took a while for it to build momentum, but the next big change was the Zuffa era. Like, that's when I started, it's when we first met. They took over at UFC 30. What was the difference? What did Zuffa bring?
Well, SEG was on life support, and I give Bob Meyerowitz and the ownership great credit for keeping it alive long enough for Zuffa to take an interest and buy it for $2 million. That's pretty good event spit. Okay. Nice job. Yeah. Well done, Fertitas and Dana White. But they're the reason it's successful. And they brought a bunch of us who worked for SEG out to Las Vegas. All we knew is we had these big casino guys. They were really cool, and they had deep pockets. And we were in a back room in an Italian restaurant, and Lorenzo said, any questions? And I wasn't really a Vegas guy at the time, Elvis. And I said, will the UFC ever be on a billboard? And he said, absolutely. And I left that night going, wow, that's crazy. We're going to be on a billboard. That's all I expected. That was it. I was happy with that. You know, years later, Times Square, and I mean, we're here for the 7th time in Australia. The real key in the big picture was we started to embrace regulation. We didn't run away from it. We wanted to make it a sport. We wanted to make it legit. We wanted to make it mainstream. And the regulation and the mixed martial arts, you know, rules and regulations that were written back then, Jeff Blatnick was part of it, a real key. And you fought under, you know, that new system, Elvis. The biggest thing, though, was The Ultimate Fighter. And we often tell that story. But right before The Ultimate Fighter, Lorenzo Fertitta, this is the story I've heard many times, there was about 40 or 50 in the hole. And he called Dana one morning and said, you know what, gave it a shot. Maybe we just take our losses right now and walk, and, you know, this isn't what we thought it might be able to be. And then he said, you know what, let me sleep on it. Next thing we knew, there was a $10 million investment in Spike TV for The Ultimate Fighter Season 1. And boom, when Forrest and Stefan finished that fight was when I knew that this sport was going to be legit. Did I think it was going to be like it is today? No, not back then. Am I surprised? No, not really, because of our ownership and the love and belief. But yeah, it really took like deep pockets and really like you're at the poker table, you're out of chips. And somehow they turned it around, and we're all here today.
The UFC was really starting to expand. It was going from strength to strength.
Yep.
We saw them buy out Pride, WEC, some great champions from there, Strikeforce, Affliction. All these other organisations which were competing against it, all of a sudden they just could not keep up. Tell me a little bit, you know, what was happening around that time as obviously UFC was just going through the roof. I know we had WWE made a couple of offers to you as well to try and to slow the momentum, but it didn't. You know, tell me what was going on.
Well, the WWE, I'm just glad that I was able to stay on the boat and find this beautiful island that Zuffa has run into, because back then we knew the WWE island was really cool. We weren't sure what waters we were in with Zuffa at the time. You know, the real story and the real key to as this sport continued to grow and then other organizations would try to compete, you know, being the first is special. And it might not be being the first date-wise, because Pride in Japan has a great history, but you know, you don't really use tissue paper, you use Kleenex. Yep. And you don't really have mixed martial arts, you actually have the UFC, to the point where certain people say, oh yeah, the sport is UFC. We're the organization.
I trained UFC.
Correct, yes you did. You trained UFC, exactly. And I've always said everybody wants to play on Sundays because we're the NFL and we're blessed to have that reputation. I think you saw a lot of the buyouts and the takeovers, Elvis, is because Dana always promised the best fighters in the best fights. And so if those fighters were with other organizations, they were appealing for us to get. And some of the moves were made strategically from a bigger picture. And honestly, some of them were because we inherited 5, 6, 10 contracts of superstar fighters that we wanted in the octagon.
Well, that obviously led to the next question, where it started becoming multinational. We had champions, GSP from Canada, BJ from Hawaii. I know that's America, but it's across the water.
I flew over it. I flew over it a couple times to see you.
Brazil, but it was the first start. You know, prior to that, it was like all-American champions. You know, Matt Hughes, Rich Franklin, Tim Sylvia, Tito, all Americans. But now, all of a sudden, we had international champions.
The sport transcends every part and every fixture, every home, and every facet of martial arts. And obviously, Royce Gracie came in and introduced the world to Gracie Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And wow, is it fun to go to Brazil and call fights. It's awesome. They're so into it. You know, and Anderson brought, you know, the best version of stand-up back then that we've ever seen. I mean, he's a ninja. He's an absolute
amazing
thrill to watch every single time, the things that he was able to do. I mean, I was watching your network the last few days, and I see the kick again on Vitor. That never gets old. I'm sure it's old for Vitor, but, right? But it never gets old. And GSP, again, spectacular athlete. Fought Matt Hughes the first time, didn't win. Now remember, I do a pretty good GSP. He goes, the first time I tried to hit him, and he was my idol, but this time he's just a man, and I get the fight, and I get the win. This wasn't bad, huh?
Yeah, that's pretty good. I had me looking around.
As long as GSP's been gone, right? So GSP, obviously, in Montreal was insane. Watching him walk in Montreal, loud as any crowd we've ever seen.
Yeah, which again leads to, we went to Montreal, went to Brazil, we went to London, went to Manchester, started spreading throughout the world, Japan, Europe, and it continued, led to Australia. Now you are here for UFC 110. Again, a little-known fighter, Cain Velasquez on that card.
Right.
Coming up, give me your thoughts. And the crowd, the Australian crowd were insane for that event. Tell me about your first time in Australia.
Well, first of all, you were a great host, so thank you for that. Sydney is a beautiful city. Reminds me of Vancouver a bit. Absolutely loved being there. Fans were great. But this is the most vivid memory that I have of that UFC 110, as you mentioned. We went Sunday morning. It was an early start. I want to say the first fight was probably around noon. AC/DC had played the night before.
That's right.
And we were on the Olympic field, so right there in the stadium, right? And I walked in and I saw a scene like you would see at Lambeau Field on a Green Bay Packers Sunday. Everybody was tailgating. Everybody was having a blast. Some of them probably stayed all night. They just kept drinking the whole time. But at noon when we started, Elvis, there was not one seat empty. Not one seat empty, and the crowd was in it. And if you go back and look at the tape, I remember saying to Joe, this is unbelievable. These fans are ready for a fight. And since that time, we've been here 6 other times, and you Aussies are, you are very passionate.
Yep,
you are indeed.
We love our sports, love our combat sports.
And love supporting your own.
Which leads us, it's come so far. Like you said, we just had our 22nd birthday for the UFC. I mean, it's been a crazy ride, some amazing events. Where do you see us going now?
Just continuing to do what we're doing and continuing to put on bigger events like we are right now. I think this stadium show has been something that's been talked about for a long time. The one that we had in Melbourne with Ronda, is the main event, obviously. We had 55,000 in Toronto at Skydome, 40,000 in Stockholm. I think we're going to see these big mega fights going to the Cowboys Stadium, maybe going back to Toronto, going somewhere in Brazil and being in an 80,000 seat soccer stadium.
Hopefully New York.
Absolutely, knock on wood that New York and John Jones and DC will follow. Jones, of course, born in upstate New York, grew up in upstate New York. I think that's what we're going to see. The real key in the last few years has been Lorenzo Fertitta and his brother Frank always ran, station casinos. Their father passed away a number of years ago. Great human being, may he rest in peace. And Lorenzo was at a point, Elvis, where he was about 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. station casinos, 4 p.m. to midnight UFC, and then turn around and do it again. When Lorenzo stepped back to be with the UFC full-time, his real motive and his motivation was global dominance. And that is why we are sitting here today. There's 50 million people in China who don't care. Well, now they do, and they care about the UFC. So I really believe we'll continue to see the growth worldwide.
Well, I'm looking forward to continuing the ride. I hope to see you there along with it. Thank you very much for coming on to our show, UFC Fight Week. Hopefully we can do this again and down the track when even more happens. Thank you, Mike.
The king of rock and rumble.
All right, well, stick around because after the break, we'll take a look at Fight Night Korea, where former lightweight champion Benson Henderson hopes to make a run at the welterweight title.